Tonight on the Controversy Desk, a heated congressional hearing erupts as Harriet Hageman accuses Democrats and the Biden DOJ of political weaponization, double standards, and abuse of power. Is this justice or politics? Let's break it down.
5 minutes.
I find it very rich that any Democrat would attempt to lecture us about violence in light of the fact that it was yet another one of theirs who just 3 days ago sought to assassinate our president and his cabinet. And don't get me started on the Democrats' favorite KKK supporter, the Southern Poverty Law Center. So spare me your faux outrage about violence. According to the DOJ's report on the Biden administration's weaponization of the FACE Act, quote, in total, during the 4 years under President Biden, the DOJ charged more than 45 pro-life defendants in over 20 cases with violating the FACE Act in connection with pro-life demonstrations. This is in stark contrast to largely ignoring attacks on pro-life pregnancy resource centers, as Chairman Jordan just pointed out, in which the DOJ, despite hundreds of cases and hundreds of attacks against pro-life medical centers for women, the DOJ only charged a handful of them. So again, spare me your faux outrage. The report further reveals that the Biden DOJ prosecutors requested an average sentence of 26.8 months for pro-life defendants compared to 12.3 months for pro-choice defendants. Mr. Severino, how do these average sentencing amounts correlate to the applicable range in the sentencing guidelines?
It varies depending on whether it's a first offense or not. So it's misdemeanor for a first offense, and some of these cases where you get felony levels is second offenses. What we see in the DOJ report is that it was effectively double for the pro-life charge parties versus the very few on the other side. There was only 5 that were brought recently that attacked the pregnancy resource centers, and the disparity was essentially double.
Well, and we also have the circumstance where they raided, I think it was Mr. Houck's home in the middle of the night, drug him out the door in front of his family, simply because he was trying to protect his son from a violent pro-abortion demonstrator at a I believe it was a Planned Parenthood facility. So how do these, what they did under the Biden administration, how does that compare to other administrations in terms of the sentences that they sought, as well as the number of prosecutions?
Sure. In terms of the numbers, 97% of the cases were against pro-lifers. It was about 26.8 months for those convictions, and about 12 months for the pro-choice side. And you see with the Howe case you mentioned, that is a gross abuse where you have armed FBI agents with long guns go into this man's house where they were in contact with their attorney. And normally, under normal circumstances, if they're willing to turn themselves in, which in this case they were, they turned themselves in. But instead they made this entire spectacle and frightened their families out of their skin in order to make a statement.
I would argue a very violent spectacle of our federal government, carried out by our federal government. In fact, Mr. Houck just received, what was it, $1 million, a settlement for the way that he was treated, I believe, so federal funds going to him because of the Biden's violation of his civil rights. Isn't that correct?
I don't know the dollar amount, but this was a clear violation because he was completely vindicated at trial. It took the jury 3 hours to say not guilty. He was defending his son from a bully, and that—
A violent bully.
Right.
A violent pro-choice bully.
Yeah, so they got into, that's why my opening statement said, look, these sorts of things, you have weaponized DOJ that says you have this dispute and a father defends his child from a bully, and that becomes a federal offense, right? This is the rampant abuse. And then they have armed, a year later, armed federal agents raid his house in the morning. It's just absolute, abuse.
Well, in the case of the United States versus Gallagher, when one of the defense counsel contacted the assistant U.S. attorney requesting information on the number of FACE Act criminal prosecutions in the last 10 years, the Biden DOJ prosecutors refused to share it despite the information being readily available. Sanjay Patel, the director of the National Task Force on Violence Against Reproductive Health Care Providers, and a very corrupt man, after receiving several requests, stated, quote, as the National Clinic Violence Coordinator, I do not keep the kind of records you requested, and as a result, I do not believe that we will provide them to you. And he was lying through his teeth. They did have those records. Sanjay Patel, he referred defense counsel to DOJ press releases, and then it's also important to note, as was done by a predecessor, that he actually agreed to be a reference on a National Abortion Federation third-party grant application. The point of this being, the report has demonstrated that the Biden administration violated the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution in the way that they dealt with pro-life and pro-choice prosecutions under the FACE Act. The FACE Act either needs to be reformed or abolished because it has been abused by Democrat administrations. With that, I yield back.
May I answer, Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
Yeah, when I was at DOJ, if you had a FACE Act case, you would actually enter it. Those particular particular spot in your tracking of time. So DOJ knew exactly how many FACE Act cases at all times they had open.
I thank the witness. I thank the gentlelady from Wyoming. I'll now recognize the gentleman.
Assassination concerns involving President Trump and members of his cabinet. She also criticized organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center, accusing them of pushing partisan narratives while labeling conservatives unfairly. But the real focus of the hearing centered on one major question. Was the FACE Act enforced equally under the Biden administration, or was it used as a political weapon? Now for those unfamiliar, the FACE Act, short for the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, was created to prevent threats, obstruction, or violence targeting reproductive health facilities and places of worship. In theory, the law is supposed to apply equally to everyone regardless of political ideology. But according to testimony presented during the hearing, Republicans argue that wasn't the case. Hageman cited reports claiming that during the Biden administration, the Department of Justice charged more than 45 pro-life activists in over 20 separate. Political tensions are boiling over once again in Washington, and this time, the battle is over the FACE Act, selective justice, and accusations that the Department of Justice has been weaponized for political purposes. Welcome back to the Controversy Desk, the channel where we question everything, challenge narratives, and break down the political drama shaping America today. Now, if you've been following the latest congressional hearings, then you already know things got heated fast. Representative Harriet Hageman came out swinging during a fiery exchange over the enforcement of the FACE Act, accusing Democrats and the Biden administration of hypocrisy, political bias, and unequal treatment under the law. And trust me, she did not hold back. From the very beginning of her remarks, Hageman dismissed what she called faux outrage from Democrats over political violence, pointing directly to recent